welcome everybody to the third and final in the current series of Ask the Doc from State of Mind. Thanks everyone for joining us, particularly those of you that have been to the first and second one of these with Dr. Alan Johnson and Dr. Phil Cooper, and welcome to those of you that are brand new and are joining us for the first time. I'll very quickly just do a little bit of housekeeping and then hand over to Angela Powers, who's hosting for us today. But yeah, for those of you that perhaps haven't joined us before, this is a very interactive and informal webinar series that we're putting on, and I'll let Angela do a bit of an intro in a sec as to sort of the motivation for us doing this and speaking to the clinical experts that we are. But in terms of Zoom, the platform that we're on, the most important things to note are that you should be able to change your view. There's a couple of different options you have, whether you want to view the slides full screen or the slides and the speaker side by side, etc. So have a play around with that. And the other important bit is the Q&A panel. So once we've gone through the initial sort of presentational element of the webinar, we'll open up to Q&A. We'll leave plenty of time for that. And so use that Q&A panel to submit your questions, and I'll obviously then chair that session later on and put those questions to Dr. Clair Carson for you. And the only other window that will pop up occasionally, we've got a couple of polls to do, so it's an interactive session as part of this today. So at the appropriate point, you'll see one of those pop up. I'm actually going to start with one of those just before I do hand over to Angela. So I'm just going to launch poll number 1, which should now have popped up on your screen. This is just a simple yes/no question. And the question is, have you felt more lonely or isolated during the coronavirus lockdown? So you should just simply be able to vote yes or no to that. And I can see lots of you already doing that. So thank you. Just let the last couple do it. But in the meantime, I shall pass over now to Angela to do our intros for the morning.
Yeah, well, thanks, Owen, and welcome again to the third in our series of Ask the Doc, where we give you the chance to hear from expert clinicians on the mental health topics which matter to you. This week, we've seen some of our freedoms return, haven't we? We've been able to go shopping for those non-essentials, and the queues have been forming outside Sports Direct. Other retailers are available, obviously, and various other places as well. And I've been one of those to go out as well. It's almost as though you feel the need to go out and just see other people and have a little bit of normality, really. So how's it been for you? And for the people in your life? It'd be interesting to hear your points of view as we go through this morning's session. And this week, our expert in the chair is another of the State of Mind trustees. In fact, she's the chair of the Board of Trustees, and she's Dr. Clair Carson. Welcome, Dr. Clair.
Hello.
Well, what is it, first of all? Let's find out what it is about you, what made you get into mental health branch of nursing, and then get involved with State of Mind. Tell us about yourself, Claire.
Well, thanks, Angela. Thanks, Owen. So I actually started my career way back in 1987 in black and white, as my kids would say. And I actually started as a general nurse. I went into general nursing because I think at the time I wanted to work in medicine or surgery or A&E or one of those areas. And I did my training, completed my 3 years training, and actually did all of those areas. I did medicine, I did surgery, I did A&E, and whilst I absolutely loved it, I never really found what I truly wanted to do. And then sort of, believe it or not, in the early sort of 1990s, getting jobs in the NHS as a staff nurse was actually quite challenging. It was a difficult time. So you kind of took a job wherever that job was. You didn't really have the choice. And I ended up working in Manchester in infectious diseases, ironically, all those years ago. And it was at the time where there was HIV and AIDS was a emerging phenomenon. People were quite fearful of it and not quite understanding of it. And we used to have lots of people that came into our services to have a HIV test. Back in the day, it's instantaneous now, thank goodness, but back in the day, it used to take up to 10 days to get your results back. And 10 days of waiting to find that news out was very, very distressing for some people. And we had counsellors, and the counsellors used to support these individuals through that process. And I was just absolutely astounded by these individuals, because I was thinking, how do you manage to do that? How do you manage to take somebody who's in that absolute despair and give them hope, and even if you end up delivering the worst news ever, that you instill that kind of hope and recovery in individuals. I want to do that. That's an absolute skill that I really want to do that. So they told me, if you want to do this kind of work, go off and do your mental health training. So that's what I did. So I'd never really thought about it beforehand. I went off and did my mental health training about kind of 1991, I think it was, something around then, and worked on acute wards. Never been on an acute ward ever beforehand. And, you know, for people that don't know, acute wards are where people end up being admitted to if there is absolutely no other options. Sometimes they're detained under the Mental Health Act in some very distressing crisis periods of their lives. And as a nurse working in that environment where you can see some people and their families and relatives, etc., in the absolute desperation, and you can be somebody that can make a change to that and give that hope and instill that recovery, it's just a wonderful place to work. So I didn't actually go back to be a counsellor, and I stayed on acutes instead, and I stayed there for 17 years because I loved it so much. So during that period of time, I ended up being a sister and a ward manager and various other things. And I developed as part of one of the roles I developed a course that trained staff nurses then to work on the challenging environments of acute wards. And as part of that course, I met Malcolm. And I know Malcolm's on. I didn't know Malcolm was actually going to be joining us live, so now I feel a little bit embarrassed. Hi, Malcolm, who, as you know, I think Phil said last week, is one of the co-founders of State of Mind. So this is probably around 2012, something like that. So a couple of years after Terry Newton had took his own life. And Malcolm came to deliver a session on the course that I was running. And he was doing a session on professionalism, leadership and personal branding. And he talked about how you wanted to be, what brand you want to be, how would you want other people to see you, what is it that you're selling, what are you? That absolutely inspired me. So we got chatting, really hit it off. He is a totally wonderful man. Everybody that's met Malcolm will say the same. And we have an absolute shared passion for all things rugby. And this is probably where everybody now clicks off, because we're also very passionate Wigan Warriors fans. So at the time, he got me involved in several State of Mind activities. It wasn't a charity then, it was a campaign, really. And I've just seen a message from Oliver saying he's going now. So we did bucket collections, we did fundraising. The other thing I do is I manage a women's team as well. Both my girls play rugby. So if we ever needed to mobilise a group of people to go and collect buckets at stadiums, that was what we did. And then we became a charity, and I was absolutely over the moon and very, very privileged to have been asked to be a trustee at the time for State of Mind. And then Malcolm decided he was retiring probably over about a year ago now and stepping down as being the chair of the charity, and he asked me if I would take over. And I have to say I had massive reservations because he's big boots to fill, and I'm still quite anxious about it. But there is a great board of trustees around me. We've got a good mix of clinicians and creative people and people from HR and all academics and all different backgrounds. And it's just a great charity to be involved in, and it's a message that's close to my heart. So that's how I came to sitting in my kitchen, being on a Zoom call.
And it's brilliant that you can actually share with us some of that expertise that you've just been talking about as well, because as we talked about in the previous weeks, we have our amazing presenters, and you're out there watching now, who do a fantastic job on spreading the word, but we've also got this great expertise behind the scenes as well on the board. And we thought, if we're going to use it, now is the time when people really need some help and some advice over these trying times. And over the last couple of weeks, we've focused on elements of mental health that some have found quite challenging over the last 3 months or so. But today we're going to look, aren't we, Claire, at an in-depth look at something that some people might be suffering for the first time in their lives, really, because of lockdown. Isolation and loneliness, two slightly different things. And we started a poll, didn't we, Owen, just to see a little tick box whether people are feeling more isolation or loneliness. Should we put up the results of that now?
Can you see those?
Oh yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So 55%, yes, do feel more isolated, 45% no. And we were talking about this just before we came on air, weren't we? How some people might be actually enjoying the solitude that isolation brings, whereas other people are finding it's quite an anxious time for them as well. Before we go into any detail about what we can do, I think it makes more sense to actually define what it is, Claire. Tell us what is isolation and what is loneliness.
So I guess the most important thing to think about is that it's not exclusive to a particular group of the population. I think when people think about loneliness and isolation, we might immediately think of our later life population as an example. But I think it's important to realise that a loneliness can exist in any person, in any situation. And it is useful to know what we do mean by that, because you can work out yourself what that might mean, why are you feeling like this, but you also you'll be able to look out for other people. So I guess the first thing to say is that it is about personal experience, and it can mean very different things to different people. And I'll try to pull this slide together. I did look at the academia behind it and the research, etc. And there's not really one definition that captures it all, but I guess the nearest one is these two individuals, Perlman and Peplow. And they do define loneliness as a subjective, unwelcome feeling of lack of or loss of companionship. It happens when you've got a mismatch between the quantity and the quality of social relationships that you have and those that you actually want. So simply put, it's when as an individual, you either don't feel that you've got enough social contact in your life, or that the social contact that you do have isn't what you want to have. So, you know, some relationships can be quite damaging. We talked about this off air, but, you know, in its extremes, that can manifest itself in things like abuse and domestic violence, etc. So while somebody might be living in, you know, from all intents and purposes, from the outside looking in, somebody's in a relationship, they might be in lockdown with husband and wife, and that's okay because they're not on their own, etc. But actually, that could be quite damaging. So I thought about loneliness and isolation, and whilst they are two separate things, they do overlap. They're not actually the same. So you can be isolated and not be lonely. And conversely, you can be with lots and lots of people that still feel very lonely. And I guess a good example of that is those people that find their own company quite satisfying. I have to say, I feel like that sometimes. This house can be teenage central. I've got an 18-year-old and a 20-year-old, all their friends, loud music that I can't stand, and it's all very noisy and but it's great, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But when they've all gone and I'm on my own and I have a few hours to myself, that's great. That's absolutely fine, because it's satisfying to me. And I guess if that tips itself into me feeling sad about that, then that's different. And of course, you can have people that are in very busy families and lots of people around them, but that those relationships aren't meeting that individual's emotional needs and they feel socially disconnected. And if that person then feels unhappy as a result of that, then they can feel very, very lonely. So I guess the issue really is about it's an unwelcome feeling. It's experienced by the individual as very negative. So, you know, if you are feeling less than happy in the relationships that you have and the social contact that you're experiencing, then you can feel very, very lonely and isolated.
I imagine a kind of like graph, if you like, of going from a little bit of boredom really by being on your own, and that FOMO feeling you get, a fear of missing out, especially around the time of COVID, when you think, you know, it's not so much everybody's out there having fun, but what would you normally doing about now? And that all the way up to that just being so utterly alone and not having a voice to hear or to speak to, which must be just so debilitating for some people, especially the elderly, and especially for those people, Claire, who've had to shield because of other illnesses as well, who are stuck on their own, and the best they get is a bag plonked on their doorstep sometimes. So there is that extreme as well.
Absolutely, and I think there has been some real high-risk groups around lockdown that we as a mental health organisation, we've been quite concerned about, and that is particularly those individuals that have shielded, because, you know, they've now been shielded for 14 weeks. I think, you know, 14 weeks of not being able to come out of your house is a long time, and some of those shielded individuals are shielded alone as well. So there's been some great challenges with that. Do you want me to go on to the causes?
Yeah, because you know, it's not just COVID, is it, that's forced us into this. Life brings lots of situations up where we might feel our lives are moving into different directions, and loneliness becomes a part of it. Maybe just moving from being in an office-based job to a home-based job, little things like that. But just explain to us some of the causes of isolation and loneliness.
Okay, again, I did want to just reiterate that it isn't just for the older person. That, you know, you're quite right. The impact of COVID and lockdown has had some, you know, real effects on individuals, and I guess those people that, like you've just talked about then, that are working from home, you know, people get a lot from going into work, from that, you know, that routine of getting up in the morning, actually getting dressed, getting ready, getting in your car, dropping the kids off, doing all the things that you need to do, getting into work, and then the social interaction that you have at work with different people who have different stories to tell, etc. And then a purpose for your day, something to do for during the day. And then coming home at night, and, you know, whilst that's all can be quite mundane and routine, actually it gives you a routine and it does give you a purpose. And that suddenly disappearing and working from home, not having the same interactions, or your interactions occur either via an email or on a screen, that does have an impact on people psychologically after a period of time. And the rules around social distancing have been quite challenging as well. I know I struggled in the beginning, just about not seeing my mum, really. You know, I see my mum every single day. We walk the dogs together every single day. And not being able to do that for the first sort of 8 or 9 weeks was awful, you know. So, and I guess that those are the impacts, I suppose, that COVID has had. And we've also talked about the impact of shielded patients in relation to that. So that kind of, it's about a loss of contact or a change in relationships over time, and people's sense of identity changing, and the impacts that then has on people's well-being. People start to feel sad, can feel depressed, and I guess in the extreme cases, suicidal. So the causes for that can be really different for people without COVID. I mean, we've got that extra challenge of COVID at this moment in time. But what COVID has done is also meant that people have lost their jobs as a result of that. You know, people were furloughed, people were made redundant. There is illness. We've got to remember that while we're in lockdown, people have actually got COVID, people have actually died from this illness, and that has caused people to have bereavements, and all those things, of course, can cause loneliness. Individuals' resilience can impact on that, and I know Dr. Allen in his first session talked about resilience, and some people have resilience to be able to think, well, that's I can socially interact, I can be more I don't know, forceful, and I'm quite happy to pick up a phone, I'm quite happy to join a group, I'm quite happy to go and talk. Some people aren't quite as able to do that as others, so I guess that can impact on people as well. Life events, and I guess that's quite pertinent at this moment in time, because whoever would have thought that we would be experiencing what we're experiencing at this moment in time. Yeah. And, you know, it's unprecedented. People don't know how to behave, how to react, you know, what's normal, and it's quite challenging, is that. And I guess cultural influences can cause isolation as well. There are certain groups in society that do feel isolated, that do feel lonely, that don't feel accepted quite the same. And whilst that's shameful for me in some respects, that does still exist. So thinking of, you know, marginalised groups that struggle to be accepted into the norm. So I guess the practical connections as well. So things like internet connections. My mother, as an example, doesn't know what this whole interweb is and the whole Wi-Fi thing. What's that about? She thinks it's some kind of magic. But if you don't have those internet connections, then you know, that can lock you out of a lot of things, a lot of help and a lot of support. And transport links as well. You know, we're struggling at this moment in time with public transport. It's not as easily accessible as it used to be, and those things, and there's lots of rules now around going on our public transport. And just that ability to access support and interactions, know that it's like I was saying earlier on, some people are more outgoing than others and quite happy to go, and I don't know, I will always say, if you move to a new area, go and join a rugby club. You're always welcome at a rugby club. But some people find that difficult to do. So I guess those things can all cause that personal experience then of isolation and loneliness.
So if we've got isolation and loneliness as kind of a cause of all the things that can happen in your life, how it can manifest itself. I'm just thinking about my dad, actually, which he was the father of 6 kids, so never a moment to be alone. But when my mum died, his sense of purpose disappeared. Even though, you know, he had the rest of us around and lots of grandchildren, it was that kind of, what is the point in going on? So it doesn't necessarily mean being isolated physically. It just can be without one significant person or a significant scenario that can cause it. And he felt not suicidal, but almost he felt life didn't have a point to it anymore. And I wanted to ask you that the mental stresses that come with isolation and loneliness, how do they manifest themselves? How do they show themselves? What can we expect to see?
And I guess the thing with that is that it can be a wide range of impacts, and they can be both physical and psychological there. So you can see some physical impacts. People might gain weight, as an example, lots of comfort eating. I think when we all went into lockdown, that certainly occurred in my house. There's lots of that kind of comfort eating, lots of unhealthy behaviours, I guess, really. So you might be able to see it in others. So you might see weight gain or even weight loss. Lots of people actually stop eating as well. And then there's that increase in risky behaviours as well. So, and again, I think Phil talked about this last week as well, about people get to that, like you said, what's the point? So I'll drink that wine at, I don't know, 10 o'clock in the morning, or I'll increase smoking or drug taking and those kind of things. So those risk-taking behaviours. So those kind of things happen. That third point on there is an interesting point, really, because this is this kind of idea around a self-fulfilling prophecy, that people genuinely, when you feel isolated and lonely and you're feeling quite worthless, and that people don't value you and don't want you to be in their lives or have any social contact with you, you believe that, you start to believe that worthlessness, and that you're not somebody that could offer anything to a relationship. So when people do start to ask you, are you okay, and start to be friendly, you kind of think, oh no, I don't believe you. You just, I don't trust you, and something awful's going to happen. So you just become quite unfriendly and withdrawn, and a bit abrupt to people, and maybe slightly rude. So that person does then withdraw, and you go, I told you so. That's I was right, and that's a vicious circle, that, and you can never get out of that. And that can be, again, quite psychological or damaging. And I suppose in the worst case scenarios then of the impact of isolation and loneliness is the risk of depression, that clinical depression, low self-esteem, that's that kind of feeling of self-worth, and that you have something of value to offer. Poor sleep patterns tend to be something that get impacted quite early on, and then ultimately that risk of taking your own life and suicidality is that people think that ends up being the only option people feel that they have.
The stresses and strains of life are bad enough as it is, especially when you go through new phases of your life. For example, I went from one career to another one, and that's a stressful situation. Yeah. When you add all of those things into a forced withdrawal from society, which is what COVID has brought us, then you can see how it would have mental impact. And we've talked about that over the last couple of weeks. I'm a bit worried that we haven't seen what the repercussions of this are going to be yet, and it's like a ticking time bomb for the nation's mental health, not just the nation, the world, really. But maybe we've seen a little bit of that with the demonstrations on the street, that need to get out and make a social change. I don't know, what do you think? Are we going to see more problems and more people with problems as we come out of this?
early indications are showing that that's probably going to be the case. So, you know, the government are currently looking at the impact psychologically on lockdown that has had on individuals that didn't have a pre-existing mental health condition, but those people that did have a pre-existing mental health condition that were then forced into a situation that actually, to be fair, some people quite liked. You know, if you're an individual that doesn't like going out in public anyway, doesn't like to socially interact, doesn't like all of those things, actually these circumstances absolutely suited those individuals, and you know, they got used to that being, this is great, this is, you know, I can stay in my house and it's okay to do that, no one's pushing me to come out. But now that's changing, that anxiety of having to come back into the world again is causing some people a great deal of distress. The other thing that we've been concerned about in mental health areas as well is those individuals that during lockdown didn't seek the help that they probably should have been seeking, that we would have been encouraging people to access, and maybe not complied with the interventions quite the same because of the impact that being isolated or cut off could have and that impact we're starting to kind of slowly see now of people that have ended up being quite unwell as a result. This is in the extreme, but I've been quite unwell as a result of lockdown. So we are preparing in mental health for our surge, and we are expecting that there's going to be a surge in demand on our services. Our services never went away. We obviously we operated throughout the whole period, but we're expecting that there will be a surge in demand as a result of the impact of COVID on people's mental well-being. Those, like I said earlier, those people that might have lost their jobs or find themselves in completely different circumstances now post-lockdown. But also those people with pre-existing conditions that now need to seek the help that they may have missed for several months, and the impact that could have had. So yeah, we are expecting to see that. We're starting to see that, I do have to say. You know, I've been in work, I've worked all the way through this, and we have seen some of that over the last couple of weeks.
So we know the problems are coming. And our job today and over the last couple of weeks hasn't just been to explain a bit about the clinical side of what people might be going through, but it's to give some help and strategies for coping. So let's move on to that then now, Claire. Let's talk about what can you do if you're feeling isolated, excuse me, frog and throat, or lonely. What's the strategies we can help with?
Okay, so firstly, I need to say that I accept that not all of these are going to suit everybody's circumstances. Everybody is completely different. Some will suit some people, some will others. It's kind of a pick and mix menu. I guess as long as people try something that works for them, that's the important message. And some of these are now easier to access than others. COVID has had an impact on some of the availability of things. So there's a little bit of adapting. I did want to mention, first of all, our 10 ways of working. I know Owen's going to put that up on the, I don't know, on the link. I'm not very IT savvy, I'm so sorry. Sorry, Owen. And that's a message around the 10 ways to look after yourself. So that's always very useful to have, and it's have in your pocket. So I guess some of the things are self-help groups. I know those are difficult at the moment because, you know, lots of places like Mind and the voluntary sector do offer lots of self-help groups, but then there used to be a bit of a drop-in and those kind of things. So it's not quite the same, I guess, at this moment in time, but they are available online, and lots of things over the phone as well. The internet. So the internet can be a good and a bad thing. I do sometimes think that the internet can use its powers for evil sometimes, but it can use its powers for good as well. And it can offer a connection for people. That initial connection maybe for people that aren't quite as extrovert and able to go and join a group. Actually being on the internet is quite useful, and joining meaningful groups. There are lots of groups out there that are not, and there are damaging, but you know, there is lots of good on the internet as well. Hobbies. hopefully we're all sharing a great passion for rugby on this Zoom call today. Like I say, I've been involved in rugby for many years. Both my girls play, and they've played since they were 5. I get a lot out of rugby. I get a lot out of watching rugby. I get a lot out of my girls being rugby. But I guess the one thing I do get from that is the club and the camaraderie you can get from a club, the support you can get from a club, and the fact that I know I can walk into my local rugby club at any time of any day and there is always a friendly face there. So I guess that I would always say to people, find a hobby, find something that you really enjoy and get involved. And I suppose that's the thing with the community groups as well. And we've put volunteering on there because that's one of the things that has offered an opportunity through COVID and through lockdown, that volunteering has been something that people have got involved in. So if, people have suddenly found themselves furloughed and without a purpose and something to do in life, the whole idea of getting involved with volunteering, joining your local community hub, they're set up in each of the localities to be able to go and distribute food parcels, or even just to be that person that is ringing somebody up every day to check, are you okay, checking in and having a little chat. Those things make a great deal of difference to the person receiving the call, but can actually also be good for people's self-esteem that are doing the calls. I did put night school and classes on there. Now, I guess that's not as easy as it used to be, but those things will get back up and running again. And I guess going to a night school or a class, my dad's just, he used to go to night school. He used to go to night school to learn all sorts of things, Spanish and random sort of night schools, etc. But a lot of that was about, yes, learning a skill, but it's also about meeting new people and a bit of a social interaction. And again, a reason for going out of the house. And finally, I've put there about seeing your GP. If loneliness and isolation is something that is really impacting on your mental well-being and you are feeling sad and you are feeling that bit more than just human unhappiness, then being able to go and see your GP, I think, is something that we need to be doing. Social prescribing is a little bit more challenging in the current situation, because social prescribing is where GPs can prescribe things like leisure centres, so they can prescribe you, I don't know, like a 10-week course at a leisure centre, or other activities like lunch clubs and various other things. So I would also say go and see your GP. I think Phil mentioned it. I think actually Alan mentioned it as well about IAPT and the Improving Access to Psychological Therapies programme that exists in every single area within England. And that is talking therapies. So everything from counselling up to cognitive behavioural therapy. I think you talked about that last week, CBT. And being able to either get your GP to refer you, or you can self-refer. So if you just go online and look for your own local service, there's a whole wide range of things that you can access through there as well.
Well, we talked, didn't we, obviously about if you're going through or suffering or feeling isolated, but we looked at that poll, didn't we, at the beginning, and it was almost 50-50 that some are feeling more isolated, some aren't. Now, I'm one of the lucky ones, and Claire, you are too, in that we've been self-isolated with family. We know they're safe, we know where they are, and that's been a real kind of godsend at this time. So what can we do as these lucky ones to look out for and help those people who are suffering from isolation or loneliness? Because it's easy just to be locked in your own bubble and not see the big picture.
Okay, so I guess this is where State of Mind and the ethos that State of Mind is based on is really key, because I guess what we talk about a lot in our training sessions and on our website is that ask a mate, that look out for a mate, ask a mate. And if we all kind of adopt that ethos and that desire to really ask a mate and to be kind and to listen, then we can look out for this in other people. So I guess what I would say is just be observant. That loneliness and isolation isn't just for the older person. And the reason I say that is because we do look out for our older, and I'd like to think we do. We are looking out for the older people that are particularly in this current situation that we're in, making sure that those individuals are looked after, and that's absolutely the right thing to do. But as we've already said, this isn't just something that affects that group of people. So just think about your friends, think about the current situation that they might find themselves in. Is your friend now working from home when they used to work in a busy office environment? Are they furloughed? Have they actually lost their job? Are they homeschooling? That challenge of, I can't even imagine what that would be like, trying to get my youngest daughter, who's 18, and she was 15, trying to get her to sit down at a table to do some work during the day would have been blinking impossible. So hats off to people that are doing that. So really think about what people's circumstances are, and then, you know, ask them. And we say it all the time, ask a mate. And I guess what we would absolutely say is that if you are asking somebody how they are, just be prepared to listen to the answer. You know, don't just do that whole, "Are you all right?" You know, that we need to be saying, "Are you okay?" And if somebody says, "Actually, no, I'm not," let's listen to the answer and let's support that person. And let's not just do it once either. It's not just a one-off. We've got to, you know, continue to support that individual. And I have put go for a walk on there, because I think that's such a simple thing to do. But you can just grab a mate and go for a walk. And we can do that now. We can do that socially distancing now. Let's just grab someone, grab your dog, grab whoever, let's go for a walk. And I actually think walking and talking is a real non-threatening way of talking to somebody. It's not like this, I don't know, one-to-one over a brew counselling type of approach. It's not intense. It's just chit-chat. And it's, you know, it's a quite a safe environment to just go and have a chat and a walk with somebody. And that can just make people feel so much better as a result of that. I put ring there. So some people can go all day and not hear another human voice. And if you really genuinely think about that, that's terrible. And, you know, so I would say and I am a talker, and I know I'm a talker. I might be talking too much this moment in time. So that comes easier to some people than other people. I get that. But actually, just ring somebody. Don't text them, ring them. Let them hear your voice, and you can hear them. Just have that conversation. And again, I put join a class. I know that's not as easy as it used to be, but these things will come. You know, things will come back. And just join a class and ask your mate to come with you. You know, that can be a boot camp. It can be whatever that, you know, that individual might have an interest in. Just ask them to come along. Again, it's non-threatening, it's supportive. And I have put #BeKind at the end of that, because I guess what I wanted to say about that is, let's not make that be meaningless. You know, we had #BeKind as a result of Caroline Flack very sadly taking her own life earlier on this year. And it's become a bit of a trend, and whilst that's great because it's got a message out, we need to remember what the message is, and let's not make it meaningless. So, you know, if we say #BeKind, let's actually be kind, let's actually listen, let's actually care and act on what that really means.
Excellent. That's such a great message to put out there, isn't it? Because being kind is something we can all do. Sometimes we just got to bite our tongue and just not say the thing that's on the tip of your tongue, and just think about how other people are feeling. That's the thing, isn't it? It's just about being empathetic. I think, Owen, we've got another poll, haven't we, here, that we thought we'd ask people to give us some opinions on.
We do indeed. I shall just share that now. So this poll is entitled Caring for Others. And the question is, again, it's just a yes or no. Are you currently worried about a friend or relative and their loneliness or isolation? So I'll leave that open for a couple of moments while we carry on.
Yeah, well, I've just put my little vote in there. And I think listening to what you've been saying as well, Claire, it kind of opens up the whole kind of world of what loneliness is, because you might just assume that other people aren't lonely, but you know, you just don't know, do you? Just because you've not seen them and you've not heard from them doesn't mean they're okay. So that's made me think about other people in my life, and maybe I need to make more of an effort to pick the phone up. I'm a bit of a funny one like that. I kind of a bit confessional here now, is that I always feel as though if I ask a question and I can't give an answer and solve it, then I feel somebody. So it's easier for me just to touch base by text, just to let them know I'm thinking about them, rather than just them ring up and say, what can I do to help, and then feel I can't do anything. You know, we feel a bit out of control sometimes. What do you think? Do you feel?
I guess the thing is not to think that you can solve everybody's problems. It's okay not to have the answers, but you know, if you're there and you maybe work it out together, just that conversation together. You know, there's nobody's an expert in this. If you know, just being able to say, just being honest to people. You know, if you've said to your friend, I don't actually have the answer to this, but you know, maybe we could try this, or have you thought about that, or you know, what do you think? You know, none of us are going to have that magic solution, but what you can do is give you time and at least let that person know that you're valuing them and that you're with them. You know, that in itself is, you know, invaluable.
Yeah, good advice there. We'll work on that one. So should we do some more scenarios here? Because we've got a couple that kind of linked in with some of the things we were talking about last week and the week before that as well. But I think if we try to look at it within the prism of loneliness as well, we might just get different sort of perspectives. So scenario number one is Janet. She's a single parent in lockdown. She can't get to grandparents because they're shielding of her children. Sorry, grandparents of her children, and she's furloughed and at home doing the homeschooling. She's drinking a little bit more than she used to do, and she's been a bit short with the kids. She can't be bothered to get dressed. I think there's been an awful lot of people living in the pajamas recently, and she feels sad.
Yeah.
What is she feeling? What's she going through? What can she do?
So I guess when I look at this scenario, I think that this individual is probably both isolated and lonely. You know, I mentioned it earlier on, that challenge of homeschooling in itself, I think, is a great challenge. Whilst this lady's obviously dealing with the fact that she's furloughed from work, and I think a lot of people think, oh, that's great, I'm getting paid to just stay at home. Actually, the anxiety that's come with people being furloughed, and what does that mean, and have they got a job at the end of it, that in itself can cause those anxieties. So she's evidently feeling isolated and lonely, and she is using poor coping strategies. And it's sometimes one of the first things that we do reach out for, particularly the drinking, unfortunately, because it's easily accessible and because it's legal and because, you know, it's acceptable. That kind of increase in drinking. It sometimes is one of the first things that occurs, and then that impacts about being short with the kids as well, that a little bit of transference of anger, I guess, about the situation being taken out on the children there. So I guess from her point of view, individually, I'd like to think that Janet can recognise this in herself, that she might be thinking, I'm drinking a little bit more than I normally should be, and I recognise that I might need a little bit of help. And you'd like to think that she might phone a friend, have a conversation with a friend, or use the internet, or use our voluntary sector, as I've talked about before. The drink sometimes can be a bit more of a concern, and there are obviously this specialist help around drinking if that becomes a real problem. But I suppose the other things that we talked about, I mean, if she's not getting dressed and she's feeling sad, then maybe that going through to a GP to have a conversation, or the IAPT service, as we've talked about earlier on. Now, if I was a friend of Janet's, I might be thinking, I need to ring and talk to Janet. You know, I need to think about her scenario and what it might be like to be a day in the life of Janet. And it might be a struggle. And to give her a ring and to see how she is and to talk, offer a socially distanced walk. Even, you know, the kids can come along as well now, that's okay. And again, if I'm a friend of Janet's and I'm very concerned about her psychological well-being and her sadness being more than just human unhappiness, then I would encourage her to ring a GP as well, and maybe even support her to refer to IAPT.
I think there's sometimes that we tread a fine line as friends, don't we? That you don't want to be suggesting something that they're going to say, I'm not that bad, or I've not got that much of a problem, you know, and it is sort of using your nous really and trying to work out and almost diagnose what you think your friend needs.
Yeah. And you'd like to think, if you know your friends, that it's not going straight into, oh my God, you need to go to your GP or not, you know,
Yeah.
that's just that.
Yeah.
And it is that very simple thing around saying, how are you? And please be honest with me, how are you? You know, and that can just allow that opening up. And again, in that non-threatening way of going for a walk and a talk and those kind of things. So it's not that intense kind of situation.
Great advice there. Scenario number 2, this is Luke. He's a young single male, lives alone. He's working from home full time. Used to be a season ticket holder to the rugby, but can't go at the moment. Hopefully not for much longer. His friends are in relationships and he has limited interaction with them due to lockdown. And his sleep pattern's disturbed, again, use of alcohol and fleeting thoughts of suicide. Is he on a slippery slope here?
And I guess that's the concern, isn't it? You know, you've got a young male there who's living alone, just by simply being male. Unfortunately, you're in a high risk category of taking your own life. It's not exclusive to males, but it does impact on males more so. Working from home full time, and again, whilst most people think, that's great, you know, I don't have to do the commute, I don't have to do, we talked earlier on about those social interactions, and actually that purpose to your day, that, you know, if your only commute is from the bedroom down to your kitchen table and you see nobody in that process, after time, that can be very isolating, and it can impact on your mental well-being. And I guess, again, I've mentioned rugby here, but it could be any sport, it could be any activity that actually, if that is your complete passion in life and you're a season ticket holder, so you go to every single game, you probably go to the away games, you probably see, you know, your friends there or other people that tend to sit around the same area as you do, as these things go. And suddenly that being taken away from you, but not just physically being taken away from you. We've had no, I mean, it's been great recently. We've had the live rugby come through from New Zealand and Australia, but actually we've had no live sport in this country. And if that is your passion, you know, that's been taken away from you as well. And then I think that there is that issue around your friendship group, and, you know, if all your friends are in relationships, they probably are dealing with their own new reality of being in lockdown, and they're in their relationships, etc. So that interaction has been completely and probably very abruptly stopped. And, you know, so from Luke's point of view, I would be starting to get concerned, particularly if he's having fleeting thoughts of suicide. So I guess if I'm Luke, I'd hopefully recognise that there's a problem, there's something not quite right here, and my sleep's disturbed. I'm drinking more alcohol than I would do. I'm drinking during the week, as an example, you know, and I'm getting these thoughts of suicide. Where have they come from? Why has that suddenly appeared in my mind? So I would either be thinking, I'm going to talk to a friend about this. I need to pick a phone up and talk to a mate, or I might talk to my GP. Young single males don't tend to do that, and
I was going to say it's unlikely. Yeah,
it's unlikely, but I would absolutely encourage that to occur. You know, GPs are a great source of help, but you do have to ask for that help. And there are other sources of help that's available, and I know we're going to put some links in the chat. So particularly Samaritans is a great non-threatening organisation that somebody like Luke could ring for a chat and a talk over, and for some advice, etc. And I have said, you know, things that we talked about earlier on about coping mechanisms. So maybe even go and join your local rugby club if you're not already part of that, especially now because we're starting to come out of lockdown. So we're starting to have some activities that are occurring at our rugby clubs, which is very exciting, even if it's just that pod training that we do in the kind of training with 5 or 6 people in a pod, but just that interaction and that kind of getting yourself up to a club or joining some fitness group. Now, if I was a friend of Luke's, I would again be thinking about, let me recognise what circumstances he's living in, you know. And it's not selfish not to do that, because you've got your own scenario to be dealing with, your own situation to be dealing with. But as a friend, to think, what would Luke be going through at this moment in time? He's living on his own, etc. So ring them, give Luke a ring, and like we've talked before, ask him to come and meet you for just a walk and a chat. And maybe support Luke to join some groups or online, get some help online, or come up to a rugby club, etc. And what I would say is keep in touch. Don't let it just be a one-off. If you ring somebody and you go for a walk, even if it's saying, I ain't got a lot of time this week, but I can meet you next Monday, that's fine, because Luke will have something to look forward to. So I guess it's that, making sure it's not just a one-off and then it gets dropped. It's got to be consistent.
I hope there's men watching this as well, because I think they're the ones who find it harder really just to pick up the phone. And I don't want to make a sweeping statement like that, but I think we all know of somebody who knows a Luke in their life, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have we got time to shove one more scenario in there, Owen? What would you rather do? Just another scenario.
Let's squeeze that last one in, yeah.
Great. So last scenario here. This is Susan. She's a married mum of 2 teenagers now working from home. Her husband's a nurse and he's working long hours all day, so she's stuck at home trying to homeschool teenagers. We've already touched upon how difficult a job that is. They can't be bothered and they're dismissive of her attempts to talk to them. Her parents are being shielded and she's anxious about them. Limited friend circle. She feels she's voiceless. And she's drinking a little bit more as well. Gosh, there's a little thing going on here, isn't there? And a bit earlier every day. So, I mean, Susan, I think she's quite a typical middle-aged, not even middle-aged, sort of like young mother, isn't she? That will be. I can see this happening without COVID. I can see this being a scenario of everyday life for a lot of women who, I'm not being sexist again there, but a lot of women who do either work from home or are in charge of looking after the kids while somebody else is out working.
Yeah, it's not an untypical scenario, this, I guess, and again, I don't want to stereotype at all, but this is a situation that lots of women do find themselves in, and this scenario was about encapsulating isolation and loneliness, because this lady I feel is quite isolated. You know, she does have absolutely has a purpose in life, and you know, it's a challenging purpose, but she does have a purpose in life. But she is quite isolated, and I think particularly that limited friends and that social interaction that is really important in people's well-being. And somebody looking into this scenario would think, you know, she's a married lady, happy, 2 teenagers, everything in life, etc. But genuinely thinking about that, you know, that we never really know, do we? And there are struggles in people's lives. So I guess if I'm this lady, I can't remember what we called her.
Susan.
Sorry. You could call her Claire, to be perfect. So if we talked about Susan, if I'm the individual, I would actually try to talk to my partner. You know, I think it's a particular challenge at the moment for our nurses that are working long hours, etc. Without COVID, our nurses work long hours, etc. But actually, that first step of talking to your partner, this is how I'm feeling. It doesn't mean that I'm unhappy in a relationship, I want that to change, but actually, if I'm feeling like this, it's real to me. So talking to your partner and trying to get some mutual support that way. Also, purposefully thinking about your drinking and trying to stop that alcohol intake. I think if you're finding yourself drinking earlier and earlier in the day, and you're beginning to get concerned about it, just the fact that you're beginning to get concerned about it probably means there's a problem. So I guess that real sort of effort to think, well, I'm not going to have a drink today, or I'm not going to drink during the week, or whatever kind of limits that we put on that, those things will help. And again, I would say for Susan to access some support, to access some, you know, phone a friend. It says limited friends, it doesn't say no friends. So phone a friend, phone somebody that you know you can talk to. Access some of the support that we've got in the voluntary sector. And again, go to a GP if she feels that she needs some more support. Now, if I am a friend of Susan's, I would do exactly the same as I would do with other scenarios. I would ring. Again, I would talk to her and I would be prepared to listen. Because again, if you're going to ask that question of, are you okay? If Susan says, actually, I am absolutely not, this is completely terrible, then you need to be prepared to think, well, I'm going to spend a bit of time to talk to my friend. The social distancing, walking, all of those things are really useful. And again, just that being supportive and being there for her. And I would consistently say, don't let it just be a one-off. Don't just pop in and pop out again, because that sense of abandonment can actually be even worse. So if you're going to be there for someone, be there for someone for as long as that takes.
Oh, and I read that scenario. It seemed to me that Susan needs some stimulation. Maybe a night class will be perfect for her, or some online learning, you know, just to feel the brain cells sort of rubbing together again. Maybe might be the thing. But as you've come up with some brilliant ideas there, Claire, that will give us a lot of food for thought as well about what we can do for other people too. Owen, did we have the result of our second poll?
We did actually, yes. So the poll was very heavily weighted.
Oh my, that's a lot.
And I think that's just testament to, well, a couple of things. Obviously that we all know people that we would worry about, whether it's because they're not currently in a relationship, or perhaps they are an elderly relative, or for any number of circumstances. But also I think the current situation has made us all think a little bit more about other people and have better empathy, perhaps. Maybe that's a positive to come out of this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right, so from there, we've got some questions that we could give to Claire from our audience.
We have indeed. So I know we're losing a couple of you bang on 11. So Ollie, I promised I'd get your question in first, and thank you for your comment, Ollie, before as well when we were talking about the young male scenario. Ollie made the point that there's lots of great online groups, particularly aimed at men now. Things like Offload. I think there's an online offload session last night, in fact, in Warrington. Man Talk and other such projects. So, but Ollie's question that he asked, Claire, was: do you feel that people in the NHS need to know more about the other ways that people can access those more informal ways of helping people with their mental fitness and resilience and isolation issues?
So I guess the short answer would be yes. There's lots of work being done on that over the last few years particularly, and I think we've recognised, I mean, obviously I work in a specialist mental health trust, so we might be ahead of the curve a little bit there, and that we've always engaged more than just NHS specialist services about helping people with their mental wellbeing and mental fitness. So, you know, utilising the voluntary sector and all of the groups that exist outside of the NHS is absolutely the right thing to do, because that's something that can be sustained forever. That's your community, that's, you know, where you live and where you exist. The answer doesn't always lie in a hospital. But I guess there's that education then that needs to be further than a specialist mental health trust. So, you know, if you're accessing help for a physical condition, we need to be able to recognise that there may be a psychological part to that physical condition. I think Phil talked about last week parity of esteem, and that ability to equally see both mental and physical illnesses. We're not quite there. Some areas are better than others, and I think there's lots of things that we can do to improve that.
Great, good stuff. Thank you for that, Claire. I think another question that came in was from Jo Phillips, our colleague. Hi, Jo. She asks, hi, Claire, how do you distinguish between an isolation that is simply because you want some solitude, or from an isolation that could be symptomatic of something more deep, like depression, where you withdraw in a way that's detrimental?
And I guess that's the stuff we talked at. Hi, Jo, by the way. I hope you're all right. I guess that's the stuff that we talked about right at the very beginning, that actually some people do like to be isolated and are okay with that. And I guess that's the difference, that if you live an isolated life, some people aren't outgoing and don't want to have lots and lots of friends, are quite happy with very tight social interaction and sometimes no interaction for a few days. If that individual is well, sleeps well, eats well, you know, is healthy and happy doing that, that's absolutely fine. The difference will be when being isolated impacts negatively on your mental well-being and it starts to have a detrimental effect on how you feel. That would be how I would distinguish between the two.
Good stuff. Lovely. Thanks for that question, Joe. Feel free to add more questions to the Q&A, guys, those of you that are with us. I had a quick one myself, actually, Claire, if that was all right. And it was specifically around social media. And these days, the fact that with social media, you can kind of feel connected to thousands of other people, but genuinely, are you? And you know, how does that impact on isolation?
Yeah, I mean, I did mention it and earlier on about the internet, because I do think the internet is an absolutely wonderful tool. It can bring connections to people, and it can bring a world to people that might feel isolated, and have some interactions therefore with people. But social media particularly, social media can portray things in a way that aren't necessarily the reality, and you end up sometimes feeling that there's you know, you're not quite living your life like that individual, or you're not quite as good as that person, or you know, no matter what you do, you'll never have that £1 million yacht and the famous person, you know, etc. So I guess in its extreme, social media can be quite damaging, because I think people feel like they're connected to a world that they're not really connected to, and it stops them from actually being connected to a world they could be connected to, and that you can kind of get lost in that. And I do think that the internet, and like I said earlier on, I think the internet is great, as long as we recognise its limitations and we use it appropriately, because I do think you don't want it to replace your relationships. It just becomes part of your life, not all of your life, and I think you need to get that balance, really.
I think just another point I'll make. I'll leave the Q&A open for another couple of minutes for anyone else who wants to ask anything. But I think that point you made earlier was dead interesting, Claire, about it's important that we give people the opportunity to hear a voice and make a phone call rather than texting. But that's not necessarily that easy for everybody. It's something that I've experienced recently with a neighbour who lives alone, and we knew had a new health diagnosis that was going to be very, very stressful for her. And so we may, even though she's only next door and you can have the chat on the driveway, we started picking up the phone more regularly. And actually, as individuals, my wife and I got a lot out of doing that. And I think when we speak to presenters on State of Mind, everyone always talks about how good it makes them feel to actually reach out and do that for other people.
And that's okay. That's all right to, you know, to acknowledge that we do things in life that make us feel good. You know, not every act that we do has to be altruistic. I guess that's what I'm saying. If sharing your experience or sharing your time or volunteering makes you feel good, that's great. That's absolutely great. Carry on doing that, because it impacts positively on yourself and the person that's receiving that. That's a win-win. That's something I would absolutely encourage.
Good stuff. Lovely. Well, we've got a shy bunch this morning because I don't. Oh no, hold on. There is one more. Okay, a question for Dr. Claire from Lady B.
Lady B. Hi, Gillian.
From Gillian. Volunteers will need to have a place to be able to support people in accessing kindness, help that we are talking about. Is it okay to approach local sports clubs, clubhouses, and if yes, how?
So I guess, first of all, I want to say hello to Lady B. So Lady B and I, Gillian, we're both on the Royal College of Nursing Mental Health Forum. She's one of the nurses that's on that, very active, so I'm glad that she's here. So in terms of volunteering, yes, I think it absolutely is. I think most people would say, I mean, I can speak for my rugby club, but I guess every rugby club's the same, that we were always looking for volunteers. There's always something to do. There's always something to volunteer. You know, it be that, I don't know, serving bacon sandwiches on a Sunday morning to a load of hungry kids and parents and brews, etc., marking out pitches, cleaning, you know, any manner of things that we need at rugby clubs. And our rugby club won't be unique. There'll be other clubs, other sports clubs, other community facilities that always are looking for volunteers. I know my father, as an example, and my mum actually, both volunteer in the local church cafe that they have as a kind of a charity shop. You know, they do a couple of hours each every week. And it's the social interaction, and it's the feeling like you're giving something back to society. So I'd absolutely encourage that. And yes, I would approach local clubs if you have a particular interest in something, or to be looking online at volunteering opportunities, particularly in the NHS at this moment in time. There's lots of calls for volunteers in the NHS, and to go online and to join up that way.
Great, thank you, Claire, and thank you, Lady B, for the question. Lovely. Right, so we need to wrap up there, really, just looking at the time. So just so people know, I've pasted a few things into the chat panel today, so that will remain open just for another minute or so if you want to grab anything from that. The last thing I've just put in there now is the YouTube links to the last two of these webinars with Alan and with Phil. This recording will go up later this afternoon as well, so we'll promote that link via social media. Feel free to share these links with anybody you think will get something out of them. I think we've covered off in 3 webinars an amazing amount of knowledge and clinical expertise, so it's been absolutely fantastic. Before I just hand over to Angela just to do some final thanks and goodbyes, we will play out this week with another one of the State of Mind films. But this one was from 2013 when we focused our initiative around the State of Mind family. And this is a short trailer version of that film, which I think is really, really apt and pertinent at the moment in terms of looking out for other people. So, Angela, I'll hand back over to you just finally.
Yeah, thanks, Owen, and thanks, Claire, Dr. Claire. That was absolutely fantastic, and I've absolutely loved the opportunity, really, to get inside the minds of our clinicians, because you've got the expertise and you've been able to pass that over in a way that's been so articulate, understandable, and approachable and accessible as well. So thank you very much for that. I just wanted to finish by saying that whatever you're going through in these tough times, and we've all had our own personal, absolutely unique set of circumstances, you don't have to go through it alone. There's always somebody at the end of a phone, even if it's a stranger at Samaritans. They're sometimes the best people to speak to. And always remember, however bad it feels now, it will get better, and just hang on in there. And thank you so much for joining us. Hope to see you again soon on the other side.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Angela.
It's kind of seen as a big macho sport. We're supposed to be these big, tough rugby league players who have no emotions.
Every second, the next tackle could be the one that finishes you.
Mental health is your ability to deal with the ups and downs of life, realistically.
The fact when you go on operations, a couple of guys and that lot are not going to come back with you. The mental strain is unreal.
I've been relegated, I've been through administration.
I had to have spinal surgery.
I was engaged to a girl who died of cancer.
I'm going through a divorce and it's not very nice.
I've suffered from depression for 12 years and was borderline suicidal. A phone call to a friend stopped me doing something stupid.
If you are strong enough to talk about it, there's always someone there that will listen.
Rugby league in general is one big family, and we look out for each other.
I've had a bad day at school or something, like playing rugby, and it calms me down a bit.
That's the bond that rugby league players have with each other. They're always there to help each other.
It's awesome to be a part of the sport. Everyone's real close.
The State of Mind family belong.
Thanks, everyone. Be kind and stay safe.
Stay safe. See you all soon.